Hello, this is Sergio Morero, and today we are here at RBL1 Live with Flavia de la Fuente. She is a VC with BuildGroup out of Austin, Texas. So welcome, Flavia.
Hey, thanks, Sergio.
Of course. Let me share a little bit about Flavia because she just to share a little bit of her background. She studied political science at University of California. Was actually the commencement speaker there. She also graduated from McCombs Business School where she got her MBA. Has worked in banking at Merrill Lynch. Worked at the Sierra Club, Employee Retirement Systems of Texas, and now switched over to the investment side at BuildGroup. So we're excited for you to share your expertise today on venture investing.
Oh, yeah, sounds good.
Great. So I'll pass it over to you. Can you share a little bit more about what is the BuildGroup?
I can tell you all about BuildGroup. So BuildGroup is pretty special. It is the kind of second act of the former executive team at Rackspace, based in San Antonio, Texas. So, the longtime CEO there, Landon Napier, took the company from single-digit millions to billions. And when he parted ways with the company, did his thing and walked about in the woods trying to figure out what his next big move would be. And he landed on this idea of figuring out a way to truly align investors with entrepreneurs for the long term. And this is something that investors talk about a lot, and it's all over their websites and their pages. We're long term, we're there with you for the long haul. So we actually have it written into our documents. BuildGroup is a holding company. We have the ability to buy and hold investments for as long or as little as makes sense. Your traditional fund structure has a lifetime, right? 7 years, 10 years. You spend the early years writing checks, deploying capital, and towards the end, you need liquidity events to return capital to shareholders. That's just kind of the deal, right? That's how it is. It's neither bad nor good. It just is. But Lanham really wanted something that was, as he likes to say, outfitted for the 20-year journey. And so BuildGroup is a financial vehicle of 350 million under management, and we're backed completely by families and family offices. So we have long-term alignment all the way down to the roots of the organization. Families don't have usually don't have these kind of hard and fast return targets that perhaps your pension fund might. So so we have this great long-term alignment, and that's one of the key features of BuildGroup, and really one of the key features that drew me to the organization. Before BuildGroup, I was a stock jock. I was working in the stock market for one of the pensions here in town, and it's just kind of a very short-termist environment. Lots of investors talk about how they're really long-term, and then there's an earnings miss and people just dump stocks. And obviously you can see over the past 6 months, it's difficult to find rhyme or reason in the stock market. So I was really interested in BuildGroup because of this, because of the structure, because of this governance. And it's maybe not the sexiest topic, particularly since, we're like tech investors and software investors, and, we could talk about a lot of other things, but I think the governance is a really, really important issue, and something that people should carefully consider whenever they get into business with anybody, really.
Can you share a little bit more? You mentioned family offices are backing BuildGroup, and usually venture investors. I mean, 5 to 10 years is long enough, right? Like
Sure.
compared to stocks, it's that are very liquid. How do you think in forming BuildGroup that the founders were able to create a thesis to push LPs to agree to that, to agree to that, to even more long-term horizons, and be a little bit more permanent as they
Yeah,
describe themselves.
that's a great question. I wasn't here for the formation. But my understanding is the alignment among all parties is necessary. So that also means that our leadership, Lanham Napier, Jim Curry, Gray Hall, they're also investors in BuildGroup. And so when you go to somebody and you say, we are going to be long-term investors, it's not going to be a 10-year life. It's going to be when it makes sense. And when parties are aligned, it's a question of, well, are you eating your own cooking? And in our case, our leadership team is. They are eating their own cooking. So we're not going to just sit on stuff and not make money, right? It's more about not having an artificial timeline that creates, let's say, adverse outcomes.
Got it. And just for the people that may not know, in shorter timelines, what are some of those adverse outcomes that might result in?
And it depends on your business and what you want for your business, right? If you want to kind of build something and flip it in 3 to 4 to 5 years, quick exit, this may be the right thing for you. I'm not saying this is a wrong thing, but maybe you are kind of an A, B, C, D person, but you're just missing the rest of the alphabet, but you're really good at getting stuff started and off the ground. And you just want to get the company to a point where it's then acquired by somebody who can build out the rest of the story. That's totally appropriate. But frequently what happens is there are forced liquidity events. And basically investors go to their portfolio companies and they're like, hey, it's time to sell. We need to see some cash. It's time to sell. And based on the governance structure and whether these investors have voting rights, that can happen. And at a valuation that is not ideal for you and perhaps to a buyer who is not ideal for you. So those are just the kinds of adverse outcomes that we are looking to avoid.
That's great. Thank you for giving sharing that insight. And obvious that you're steeped in the investing space, and not only for public markets but private markets. And you started your studies in political science. Can you share a little bit more of your journey? How did you go from studying political science? And kudos also on being commencement speaker. Listen to that speech on that making a difference in the world in that way. How did you how did that shift in making a difference in investing?
Yeah, you found the speech. So my background. So look, I went to UCLA from Southern California. And I had a lot of amazing friends, and some of them were undocumented. It was a really big movement at the time. I remember I met several people who were kind of the originators behind the DREAM Act, the document itself, which unfortunately has not ever passed. But I got really involved in the undocumented youth movement and got really deep into the organizing there. And it was really transformative. Lives, families were on the line. And I was just in a place where I wanted to work on big stuff that was really making the world a better place. And I thought studying politics and power was the most important thing to do. I didn't really pursue any jobs in kind of the immigrant work space post-college. I actually think a lot of organizations were more interested in re-electing Democrats than they were in actually doing something for undocumented people. I say that as somebody who's like a very reliable Democratic voter, but I kind of moved into an adjacent space and got into community organizing with the Sierra Club, which is one of the oldest and largest environmental organizations in the country. And I worked on climate change campaigns, which materially translated into being sent to Texas. I moved here on the 4th of July. And I, on my second day, got my assignment. And it was basically, there's a proposed coal plant. A construction is proposed in South Texas, and your job is kind of to just go stop it, just go. So it was a really, really awesome job. I did all the kind of grassroots stuff. I knocked on doors. I made phone calls. I talked to ranchers, fishermen, teachers, doctors, students. It was true community organizing. That coal plant is never was constructed, so big W for us and for the planet. But what it really was like a sales job, right? Except instead of selling vacuum cleaners or whatever, we were selling democracy and clean air. And I really liked it. I liked all the work. But at one point, I felt like I only understood one part of the puzzle, people power. And I think to really understand the world and to get all the tools in my tool belt, I needed to understand money and money power in capital markets. So, it was kind of a chip on the shoulder driven career move. I really like knowing a lot. I never want to feel outgunned. So I figured I'd build out my toolbox and go to business school and learn about finance and investments. And a large part of it was like, well, all those guys with all the power, they're studying finance and investments. So I better go find out what that's all about. And I did. Fortunately, I really like it also. And I studied finance and investments in business school. And I ended up getting into public equities. I got an awesome job here at a local pension fund where I spent a lot of time flying to Asia. Those days are over. But I spent a lot of time flying to Asia and looking at companies on behalf of the retirees of Texas. And I just really loved that work until I got called away by BuildGroup. So that's the winding path. But weirdly, I had this thesis that things would come together and that things that I had done in the past would be relevant to the things that I was doing in the future. And they totally are. It's really weird, but things find their way around and things come together in a lot of interesting ways. So if you're doing something that feels totally relevant to what your ultimate destination is, you feel, I have a hard time believing that most skills aren't transferable. I think there's just a certain set of skills that you can have and develop, and if you're clever, you can lift and drag and drop.
Can you share a little bit about and would love to hear what's like, how do you think about impact, especially in the area that you're investing in now? Because from what I understand, you're doing later stage investments, larger size checks. How much are your average investments, and what size of deals are you looking for?
Yeah, sure. So we're basically looking in the neighborhood of Series B or later. For a fund our size, and this is something I'm happy to spend time explaining, right? When you're deploying larger and larger amounts of money to scale, you need to write larger checks, right? And we do a significant amount of diligence. So if we write $1 million checks, we will never finish deploying capital. And as much as we are a permanent capital vehicle, that is not a sustainable use of the firm's time or resources. So, we're looking for Series B or later, writing checks that are basically high single digits to the teens, and we can skew larger if the opportunity presents itself. But we're doing that in B2B SaaS.
Great. And how do you think about impact in the B2B SaaS space?
That's a great question. We aren't explicitly impact investors.
But you specifically, because I know it's important to you.
Me.
Yes. Doesn't have to be for BuildGroup. Yeah.
I think, I'm in an interesting position. I've been with the firm for 1.5 years now. I would say I'm in the early stages of just understanding the private market investing space. Obviously, I think it reflects a lot of dynamics that happen everywhere, right? Just underrepresentation of women, underrepresentation of, Black, Indigenous people of color. Those things are kind of consistent across a lot of spaces in our world, and really, it's material things that will make the difference. You need to, and this is part of what I've thought about for a long time, is power is organized money or organized people. So to change things, you need organized money. So you're either writing checks or you're not, and organized people. So you're either hiring for diversity or you're not. So that's really, I think, the game in town. There's, lots of mentorship and introductions and meetings, but when I remember distinctly when I was more involved with stuff like the Dream Act, youth movement, there were a lot of organizations that always really, really wanted to like give us awards and like have us come to events and stuff. And we were like, this isn't helpful. Like we need you to write a check. Like we can't, our work isn't going to advance unless there's money involved. So, this award is great, but really you're just using it for your own visibility or to feel good or whatever. So get in or don't.
Yeah, the hire or wire mentality
Like
for
that.
sure.
I
Yep.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That I'm all about that. So yeah, if at least for you on the topic, I know right now not only with the current situation with COVID and then also the political unrest, right? Really highlighting underrepresentation with the injustices that were happening with the death of George Floyd, and highlighting the underrepresentation in leadership and power of the Black community, but not to mention there are other communities as well. You talk about women, Latinx. What more do you think we need to do in the investing realm, or what can we do in order to change the game, not only for diversity and investment, but of founders, but also of the decision makers?
Yeah. I think so. It's all about who and where the decision makers are and where they are, and trying to keep uncovering these layers and digging deeper, right? Because every fund has LPs, and the LPs sometimes answer to somebody else, right? Like in the case of a pension fund, they may make an investment in a vehicle, but the pension fund is ultimately answerable to retirees or firefighters or whatever. So kind of digging deeper and deeper and deeper into who has decision-making power and who has agency and what they choose to do with it can inform a lot of the ways in which capital is allocated, right? Like there are some really, really big pots of money out there who are basically saying, we want to do more investments in companies who have good ESG metrics, environmental, social, and governance metrics. And it's a very fluid thing right now defining what those metrics are, but there's a lot of intentionality around there and awareness that maybe capital can be better aligned to not just be returns driven, but impact driven as well. And that exists on a spectrum, right? There's just a pure return seeking vehicle where it's like just here to make money, just here to hit 7%. And then on the other side, there's grant making, which is pure philanthropy, right? But somewhere in the middle, there's a lot of space for experimentation and alignment, and different capital allocators can make decisions about what they want to do there. Some people will say, I'm just here for the returns. Others, like I sit on the board of the Sierra Club Foundation, we have capital that's allocated to have an impact. And if it has returns, that's great. But if it doesn't, and the only outcome is impact, then we're happy. So I think if you are building something that has impact, you kind of need to match with the right pots of money, right? Who are interested in the way your business is being run. And I'm not saying this is a super easy thing to do, but There's plenty to learn in terms of the language and terminology about what is return seeking and what is impact driven. Is that helpful?
No, definitely.
Okay.
And especially working at a limited, a pension fund. And I know you were more on the equity side, but
Yeah.
if you can share a lens of what are, for those aspiring and early stage fund managers, what are some things to keep in mind as they begin to engage with those entities?
Totally. I mean, pension funds, endowments, kind of these, you want to know where the funds are coming from. Is it for a hospital? Is it for a university? Is it for retirees? Like, know these things, know who the decision makers are, the true decision makers, because you think you're going right to the manager, the investments manager, and that they have all of this power, when in fact they're being handed down kind of a directive from on high. You want to trace that back and understand who's making the calls. And sometimes it's, as high up as like a state legislature. Or sometimes it is just the CIO, the chief investment officer. So you want all of this context because it can just save you time. There are some institutions that are specifically looking to invest in asset managers who are Black, brown, veterans. There are others who have an allocation or are interested in building up their allocation of kind of ESG assets, and you got to and figure out how they define that because there's no industry standard right now. But yeah, these are large. The role that these people have is asset allocation, and they are in a position to fund you if you meet kind of the basic specs. Usually a track record of a year or two, and align with their mandate. But a lot of this stuff is publicly available too. A lot of boards, you can watch their entire board meeting online over a very high quality video stream.
That's awesome. So I guess other areas to get information for emerging LPs that they don't know where to go. So check out what boards of different pension funds, and where would you recommend they look for information?
Well, I don't know that there is a kind of central repository of those big institutions. I think they have some trade organizations, and I'm not sure that it's a great time of your resources to join the trade organization. But you can start small in whatever geography you have. I don't know, the state of Kansas, and then there's usually a city pension and the firefighter's pension. And you may have to build it yourself, but just start poking around and figuring out how are they managing their money, looking up their public docs. Obviously if it's a government institution, it should be fairly public in terms of whether there is a impact or ESG mandate. And it's just where you have to start.
Great. I want to shift gears a little bit, and as you see the impact space evolving, and for others that don't know, when I say impact investment, I also mean ESG, right? For those that don't know, if you think of impact, there's that spectrum that you said. On one end is the philanthropic, where you don't necessarily care about returns. Then you have the ESG, which is returns first, I would describe, but it has to be impact and returns. And then there's like concessionary, right? You may concede on some profits for fun, and then there's that spectrum. As you see the space evolving, any insight on how you see venture, what experimentation in venture do you think is interesting right now that's like leaning toward the impact space?
This is great, because I'm going to say something that's a little controversial, particularly given my public equities background, is actually, and it has to do with governance, so it's very nerdy, but one thing that people are really don't like. And I mean, I kind of don't like it either. But if wielded for the right reasons, it's a powerful tool. Is, the dual voting class structure, where founders retain kind of all of the voting power and concede some of the share class to investors. So there's a couple things going on here, right? Is a lot of the dynamics in the market right now for a certain class of companies mean that founders have a lot of power and they set the terms and they get a lot of control. And if you're an impact business, that's probably a really good thing if you want to see out a vision over the long term. And I'll give you a very kind of known example, but the New York Times is a publicly traded company and they have a dual class structure. But most of the power, the voting shares, I believe, is still with the Schlesinger family. And this enables them to really make sure that the fundamental purpose of the New York Times continues to be delivering quality investigative journalism above all else, right? That's the goal, above money, above returns, above all of it. And so in that way, they're able to protect the long-term mission of the company. I think, for better or worse, Etsy is a really interesting case study. Etsy was the first B Corp to go public, and they ended up getting an activist investor involved who kind of tore at the seams of that whole concept and was like, no, you got to slash this and get rid of this and cut that. There's a great series called Money Stuff where the author kind of dives into the story of Etsy. So, if you're in an impact business, it's not a great structure for investors per se. If you're a founder, you may want to protect yourself with structures like that if you can, because things can get sacrificed on the way down the road.
And I mean, to that end, even if it's not in the impact space, I would look at, you could see some of that challenge in something like a Facebook, but also even Netflix. I remember when, for everyone that doesn't know and sees the behemoth that they are now, they used to just mail DVDs to your house, right? And then when they shifted to online, which was it was actually a lower fee per subscriber, but the strategy was, and they spent a lot of money building out that infrastructure and that content. Their stock dipped quite a bit, but they were, kind of, because of the leadership, held on to that vision and knew that it was, it was short term, a tough decision because it wouldn't be great for returns, but long term was the way to build the business. So sometimes it takes those unique structures to build companies that last.
Yeah, and it's a kind of a better, for better or worse thing, because you as an investor can kind of ride along with something like this where you're partaking in the economics but you don't have influence. You can go for the ride, but you need to know that you are putting your trust in a person, a family, a entity, whatever, to be the lead influencer in the lifetime of the company.
Do you have any are you seeing anything or any ideas around ways venture investing can be different? And where I'm getting at is, are you seeing more or less focus on let's say revenue share agreements, or maybe it's it could be like you're like at BuildGroup, right? It's a different horizon, not the 5 to 7 year horizon. So what innovation trends do you think are happening, and do you think may be needed to better support at the evolution of venture?
Well, I mean, our structure is really unique, and frankly, I hope others copy it. It was a pain to get stood up, is my understanding. It took like a year or something. That's that's something to grapple with. But a lot of organizations and institutions that claim to be long-term investors, I think, should explore structures like these, because the kind of shorter term investment vehicles, they, not all the time, but frequently prioritize top line growth at all costs. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're building a sustainable business. We are frequently in situations where, there's a lot of kind of big name, chunky enterprise contracts, and it's like, oh, Walmart or big company X, big company Y, and that's just, it's, unless yourself are already a big enterprise, it's difficult to scale, to efficiently scale up an enterprise business. We're really big. I mean, the Rackspace team, the Rackspace story is built on the middle market and kind of skimming the cream off of enterprise. So as a firm ethos, we're really interested in businesses that are kind of targeting that strike zone, because we just think the unit economics are a lot better and accessible to early stage companies, frankly.
Great. Can you share a little bit of insight for those that don't know? BuildGroup is based in Austin. You've been based in Austin. What are some of the benefits and drawbacks of being a venture firm, a venture investor in the Austin ecosystem?
Life is good in Austin. It's really hot right now, so maybe not in the dead of August. But I come from equities, and I did equities here in Austin, and I've done private markets here in Austin. And when I went to conferences, I frequently spent a lot of time with investors from New York, Wall Street, and it was interesting, but I definitely appreciated the quiet of being away from the herd, so to speak. I think most of my friends are not working in investments. They're working at companies, just kind of regular companies. And in a way, I like that a lot more, because when I'm evaluating companies or looking at new sectors, I always have somebody to call, just by virtue of not being in a financial capital or in a financial hotspot. I like what it does in terms of making sure that my thinking is my own, and not somebody else's. I kind of very studiously avoid a lot of chatter to the extent that I'm able on Twitter. There's also some really funny stuff, but I'm trying really intentionally to make sure that we are coming up with our own ideas, and that we aren't pursuing things because others are pursuing them, because that also means valuations are likely to be much higher. So we're looking for opportunities, and for us that means interesting businesses and something that isn't a sky high valuation.
Great. I know we're a little over the half hour. Wanted to ask if you can share with the audience before we close a little bit more on what you feel needs and can be done to focus on elevating more women investors, and especially outside of those, outside of the coast, and some of these. You talk about the where a lot of the herd goes. What more can we do to support female investors and investors of color?
I mean, shout out to you, Sergio. Thing I said was like, I just want to get connected. Like, I just want to start knowing who else is in the room. That for me it's very basic and fundamental. But at least if we start together, we can start referring each other, right? Because this is a very referral-based, warm introduction business. I don't love that, but that also means that, if there's organized people managing organized money, and that's how we define private capital markets, well, then we got to get organized too, you know? And me meeting you and meeting other women and Black and Indigenous and people of color and LGBTQ and, you know, anybody who's not represented in the ecosystem, which is a lot of people, if we can get organized, that is fundamentally step one. And hopefully that leads to more meetings, which leads to more checks, which leads to more hires, and that's just what we have to do. To networks are, they feed themselves, and if we aren't coming from inside the network, then we got to build another one.
Beautiful. Well, I think that's a great close. So for everyone watching, this is Flavia de la Fuente on Rebel One Live. Thanks for joining us today, and join us again Thursday to hear more, see more leaders in the space. But Flavia, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Sergio. This is great.
Yeah, pleasure to have you. Take care.
Pleasure to have you. And visit us at buildgroup.com.
Yep. Link is
on LinkedIn.
podcast notes.